And if you ever miss a class for whatever reason, Karen will have all of this on the website. So you can go back and pick up what we talked about.
Good.
So
That's so good.
yeah. So welcome to our class on Bishop Spong's propositions. He did a series of 12 propositions that he said, this is what, in the name of the book right above my head, must change or die. Some of the things that have to happen for Christianity to survive. But before we get to that, I just want you to tell me, how did you first encounter Bishop Spong? For myself, it was as I was just starting out, I'd kind of read some of his books, but what I really remember is when my friend invited me to come and hear him talk, and hearing his voice, not just from his books, but in person, just said, wow, this is a man who is giving voice to what I already have been thinking and feeling. And so that was late 90s, early 2000s. How about yourself? How did you come in contact with Bishop Spong? What's one of your first memories that way?
Well, there was he passed away, but there was a man, Robert Moore, who was a Presbyterian minister. And he led a group at St. Francis, went on for over a year, that was to deconstruct our Western religion and then reconstruct it. So we did great on the first part, but not on the second. Yeah. And he also had an adult ed class way back at the turn of the century on both books, on why Christianity must die, or change, and then the other followed it.
And Ron, that's because both deconstructing and reconstructing are important processes, and they're difficult in different ways. And some of us deconstruct really easy because we can see what's wrong with, and so we deconstruct it, but we don't do really well at rebuilding it. And other people are really good at building, but they only build what they already know sometimes. So thank you for that. How about the rest of you? How did you run into Dr. Spong?
I'll talk. Back, gosh, I don't know how long ago it was. Many years ago, over 35. I think I first saw him on television on a late night TV show being interviewed. And at the time I thought, whoa, this guy's got something here. But I kind of forgot about it, got busy. And then he started popping up on various NPR interview programs. And the more I heard him, the more I loved. So I've been a fan of his since, I don't even know.
For a long time.
35, 40 years.
Since elementary school, basically, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And if you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn that I can sell you too.
Judy, how about you?
Well, mine was an adult ed at St. Francis. I mean, I've been with evangelicals for a long time, and he just blew my mind out of the water, and I love it.
And I don't know about you, Judy, but I love being at a church that's not afraid of Bishop Spong, because if you brought a Bishop Spong at your evangelical church, the torches to burn you might start, might come out of the closet.
They wouldn't even look at him. And I have in fact, I have one friend who tried to listen to him, and she said she couldn't, it made her too uncomfortable.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think Bishop Spong would say, got my job done if I made her uncomfortable. Because I think that at least part of what he's trying to do with all of his writings is to challenge us and make us uncomfortable.
And it's good to point out that he grew up as in a segregated fundamentalist church.
Absolutely. He has so much stuff that says that says this is flowing out of his own journey and what he had, the work that he had to do. right? And moving towards a better version of himself in his relationship to all of these issues. So it's not like he's just asking us to do work that he hasn't done. Sam, how about you?
Well, I'm coming as a neophyte. I have never heard of him until last month or whenever like you mentioned about this class.
Okay.
And looking at all those books is intriguing. And I like to pick either the last one that he wrote, or one of the top three.
Yeah.
Anyone you recommend? And you said something about that we could get them virtually, or that
That's right.
if we went up there, you'd have some. So I'd be happy to order one on my own. I just finished reading 700-800 pages on how to read a poem and fall in love with it.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing to go to something else now.
Yeah. So let me really quickly show you my books back here,
Okay.
if I can get out of the way. So as Sam said, a lot of the stuff that we're going to draw from are from these top three books. Bishop Spong did these propositions, and he did them in a piece that's separate from the books, but he kind of developed them in this book in the middle called A New Christianity for a New World. But he'd kind of begun the processes without it really being the propositions in the book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die, which I just think is just a marvelous title, because it basically is laying down the groundwork that says where we're at is not good, and something has to happen. But he did his most developed treatise on the 12 propositions in his last book, which is this unbelievable book. It's unbelievable because it's good work, but it's also the title of the book.
So is that the top one you'd recommend, or should
I would recommend any one of these three. Probably, Sam, if you get unbelievable, that will have the most of what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
But I will say that, for example, I am going to send out right now all of this information to you that includes the syllabus and the processes that we're going to go through in the middle of this class. But it'll also have, I think it's 2 chapters from Why Christianity Must Change or Die, 3 chapters from A New Christianity, and 6 chapters from Unbelievable.
Okay.
Those are the chapters that we will deal with over the next 2 weeks, which are the chapters about his first proposition. His first proposition is about God and our relationship to the divine. And so what you might want to do is read those chapters and see which book seems to work for you the best, and then buy that book, because any of his books are worth having.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll get you started with things like that so that you don't have to buy all the books. But let me share my screen and show you kind of what we're going to do over the course of this. Let me find what I want to do.
Jim, can I ask can you, instead of sending out all the chapters or whatever,
Yes.
unless if you're sending out the exact chapters from the books, can you send like a list of the books and the chapters that you want us to read?
Yeah, I will do both, Joyce.
Okay.
So I'll show you. Let me get
Because we
here.
have all the books here. It's just a matter of reading them.
Yeah. So this is what we're going to do, just so you know. You can see this is this week right here, week 1. For the next 2 weeks, we'll go with his first proposition, which is about God. And he's written a lot about that, so we'll spend a bit of time. We'll take off the week of Thanksgiving, because I think that I'll probably be fat and lazy on that day. So you may not want to listen to anything that I have to say. We'll do a couple of weeks on Christ, because he has some really strong opinions about that and has written an awful lot about Christ. And then we'll take 2 weeks off. One is for Christmas and one is for the holiday. Everyone knows what the holiday is, right? My wife's birthday, which is the day after Christmas.
Oh,
Okay, so we'll take those 2 weeks off. We'll begin again in January, and sometimes we'll take, like here, put a couple of the chapters that he hasn't written as much about, a couple of the propositions like original sin and virgin birth, or either that he hasn't written as much about, or that maybe aren't as important to us. But we can take as much time as you want on any one of them. If you wanted to take 3 weeks on virgin birth, we'll take 3 weeks. If that's how our discussion goes. So when we get to propositions 7, 8, and 9, we might want to spend more time on Easter and less on the ascension, or more time on ethics and how do we live out this. And so all of this is adjustable, but we should finish up somewhere in March if things go more or less according to plan. Okay. So Joyce, what you were talking about was this. Here's his 12 theses. All right. And I'm not going to go through all of them tonight. I'm not even really going to do the first one, but I'm going to show you what it's about. His first one is about God. And he says, understanding God in theistic terms as a being, supernatural in power, dwelling somewhere external to the world and capable of intervening in the world with miraculous power is no longer believable. Most God talk in liturgy and conversation has thus become meaningless. What we must do to find the meaning to which is find the meaning to which the word God points. A new way to speak of God must be found. So that's what we're going to talk about the next 2 weeks. And then right underneath it, you can see that I chose a couple of chapters from Why Christianity Must Change, a couple chapters from Christianity, and a couple chapters from Unbelievable. So you'll have, if you have those books there, here you've got the way to be able to access them. But I'll send you the chapters as well if you don't have those books yet. Okay?
Okay,
How many?
that sounds good.
In his book, the first book that I really remember of his was Why Christianity Must Change or Die. And first of all, I just love that title because he's clearly throwing down a gauntlet and says that what we've had is not good enough. What we've had is not going to last. And how many have felt some of that that truth, that you were in some religious body that just wasn't speaking well enough the truth for you to want to hold on to it. And so that's essentially what he's doing. He's saying it's not just true of some of us, but it is true of the whole of Christianity. And so his book about Change or Die is about saying there are things that must fundamentally change about how we look at this world. And he deals with them in 2 ways. The first thing that he does in the book is he talks a lot about it just gets in my, he talks about the creed. Sorry, about the Apostles' Creed. I was thinking about exile, but that's the second thing I want to talk about. So he's and the creed, he comes from the Anglican Church, the Episcopalian Church, sorry. Creeds are really important. They say at least one every single service, maybe even a couple sometimes. And these creeds, the Apostles' Creed, for example, are really defining of the church for Episcopalians. And he looks at it and he says, they're no longer as powerful as what they used to be for him. Why? Because the Apostles' Creed, for example, was written 1,500 years ago, speaking to another time, another place, and no longer speaks as well today for what we are dealing with today. He learned that specifically. He talks about it in his book, A New Christianity, the second book behind my head. And he did it by talking with this young lady who was an MDiv student at the seminary where he was teaching. Her name was Katie. And he learned a lot from her because she was showing him the world through younger, different eyes. And she said this: a creed is a border maker, designed to tell who was an insider in the Christian faith and who was not. No Christian's creed is a full statement of faith, she goes on. It is only the Christian community's ecclesiastical response to arguments. This creed, meaning the apostles, has, like the flood, rendered our traditional religious dwelling spaces no longer habitable. And so he says, what is the creed that can carry us forward? What needs to change? Why is it that the old creed is not applicable? Well, at least one of the things that's true for me about that is because it was written to be able to say, as she pointed out, who's in and who's out. It was written in response to Constantine, who was the king at the time, trying to give legitimacy to the church, but at the expense of them being the church they had been. He essentially said, you got to say who's in, who's out. You got to get rid of some of the riffraff around you. And it changed our church. Now, that may have been a good choice 1,500 years ago. That is not the choice we need to do today. One of exclusion, one of divisions, one of barriers. And we recognize that happens periodically. About every 500 years historically, religion undergoes huge reformation. That was one of them. 500 years ago, we went through another one. It was known as the Protestant Reformation. You might have heard of it. Now get what I just said? About every 500 years ago, we go through one, and 500 years ago, we went through one. So guess where we're at? We're at the time when it's appropriate and right for us to re-examine and say, what now? What do we do here in this moment of time that draws us into what the next 500 years needs, not what the last 500 years gave to us? Not that we don't draw something from that, but it is time for us to rethink and reimagine Christianity, not just for ourselves, but for the generations after us, as they begin to look at life very differently. So the problem is that when you begin to do that, you get tossed into exile because you don't fit into how the church that you were in, the community that you were a part of, how it is that they think and act. How many of you have felt some of that exile in your life?
Mhm.
Not only that, they shun you.
Absolutely, but that's what I mean. Just like
It's-
Pharaoh, yeah, just
I mean,
like Pharaoh got rid of the children of Israel, essentially they say you are no longer welcome. And you're right, Judy, you really felt that. I know your story. How
Yeah,
about the rest of you? How have you felt exile? Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, just as a librarian, you can go to the public library and pick up some of the books. They're in the church library, but I think it's still closed. And Bookman's has those. And you can also go to YouTube and Google, or just put him in, and you can actually hear him talk.
That's exactly right.
And
And if you come here to the church library, we can let you in. We're here most days, and Melissa will check out books for you. So if you want to get the books here from the church library, if they're here, we'll do that for you. In his book,
It's nice to know somebody.
it
They
is
can
nice
get
to know
you in.
somebody.
Yeah.
In his book about Christianity, Why It Must Change or Die, he said, so what the exile has done is to free us from the killing, idolatrous limits of the religions of the world, including our own Christianity. The gods of those religious systems have also died. The God of church, synagogue, and temple is no more. The magical, personalistic, manipulative, supernatural, and sometimes vindictive power of those deities has been used historically not to enhance life, but to bless the status quo, to increase priestly power, and to support those claims of state that have expanded the wealth and power of the ruling classes. And so we are right to sit in exile from some of those beliefs. And he's not necessarily saying that every church, everywhere, every religion has always had that, but that there's enough of it there that we need to move beyond those things that are allowing that type of God to be too readily accessible, and move towards what is a better way of viewing the divine. What is the better way of being in relationship to each other around religious questions? And so this is the solution that he gives. As he goes on in that same space, he says, the God who is the ground of being cannot be owned like that. God is a universal presence undergirding all of life. God does not bless or curse individuals according to an imposed prescription of conduct. God, the source of life, calls all to live freely. God, the source of love, calls all to love wastefully. God, the ground of being, calls us to have the courage to be ourselves. So when we live, love, and have the courage to be, we are engaged in worship. We are expanding our humanity. We are breaking out of barriers. The problem is that institutions on a regular basis build, they wouldn't call them barriers, but they've built structures that they find it hard to get away from. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I have a favorite author named David Griebner. David Griebner writes parables. And he wrote a marvelous little book called The Carpenter and the Unbuilder. And in that book, he tells the story of two men who go on a journey. And where they're going is to the castle of the king, because they've been invited to have a meal with the king. And so off they go on their journey, but it's quite a long journey. And so they stop for the night. And the carpenter, one of the two men, builds a little structure for them. They sleep through the night comfortable, but when he wakes up the next morning, the carpenter is a bit uncomfortable because he looks at the structure and he says, I can do better than that. And so he spends the day improving the structure, goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning and says, oh, I can do better than that. And so works on making the structure better and better and better. And in the course of that, forgetting that he's on a journey. So the other man is the unbuilder who takes the structure apart in order to return him to the journey. At least part of how Bishop Spong sees himself is as the unbuilder that is drawing us to move beyond what we already have built or what somebody else has built for us. Some things are easy for us to reject. How many know at least something from the established church that does not work for you?
Mm-hmm.
For example, St. Francis, unlike Bishop Spong's church, rarely repeats creeds. We do not do the Apostles' Creed on a regular basis. That's part of the structure we've kind of set aside. What's something that you easily set aside?
Well, the 23rd Psalm that was just subtly changed back a few years ago. And, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. She leadeth me. And the first time I heard that, I said, well, what do you know?
Yeah. Yeah. All of the masculine and feminine language, or I should say, all of the stuff that too often has come as just masculine lady,
Yeah.
masculine language. We're changing that because we know that God is more than just the masculine. Needs to be more than just the masculine.
Yeah.
How about the
Our
rest of
mother,
you?
God.
Anything that you've seen?
Substitutionary atonement.
Substitutionary atonement.
The idea that and then as a teenager, any thought I had was, about anger or sex or anything was driving the nails deeper into, that's just an ugly.
Yeah. And you need someone to pay the price for all of that, Ron, for all that wickedness, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that is one of his propositions, is what to do with atonement theory. And how do we look at that differently? Anything else that you rightfully push aside and reject? Easily push aside and reject?
Most of the other churches, except St. Francis in the foothills.
Uh-huh. Now, the tough part is that, Joyce, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just kind of going to say something similar, just exclusionary thinking, where certain religions are special and others don't count.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially that goes to, I think, Joyce, not just other churches, but enlarging the religious spectrum even more.
Exactly, all of humanity.
Yeah, not just include Christian churches, but the larger sense of religious body.
Exactly.
Because we've done a whole bunch of only this church or only this religion is right. Now, in the midst of all that, though, there are things that you find it easier to hold on to because it gives you meaning, gives you knowledge, gives you a way to be able to move forward that maybe the next generation doesn't need to hold on as much as you do. And so part of your job is to also identify that you're still holding on to. What is it that you're not ready to let go of? And some of that, maybe it's because Bishop Spong goes too far and he's trying to push something out that you still see as essential to. But it's also an openness to say, even if I don't need it, is it something that the next generation is going to need to let go of? And I mean, even if I need it, is there a way that I can empower the next generation to let go of that which I hold on to?
Marriage ceremony.
Yeah, and that's a really good example, Sam.
Well, the other one is the blessing of the loaves and
communion.
Communion, thank you.
Yeah. But like marriage ceremony is a really good example. Does everyone know the dynamics of marriage? Our generations tend to just assume that marriage has to happen. Our children's generation don't. They're perfectly okay with living together, being in relationship, even for months or even decades without having to go through a ceremony. And so they question that about us. Why is that important to us? And there's other things like that that I hope we identify as we go through all of this. And as we move towards better ways of doing this thing called religion. The good news is that you don't have to agree with everything Bishop Spong says. In fact, he would, I think, welcome the conversation. And so I hope what we do is that we do a lot of conversing. We do a lot of sharing back and forth and helping each other find the best definitions possible. So as we look at the different propositions that are out there, you'll notice that I said that I gave you all those different chapters to read. I think there were 11 chapters. You may want to read every one of those. You may not have time to. And so maybe I read 2 or 3 of them, you read 2 or 3 of them, and we all come in with slightly different places, and we share and help each other to have more knowledge, and in our conversation to come to a bigger space than what we might get to just by ourselves. Is that a fair thing to do? So that might be especially true as we go to, hold on just a second. I'm trying to pull up the thing again, and it's giving me a bit of a problem. Okay, so here's the chapters for the next couple of weeks. But as we get to the Jesus the Christ weeks, I want you to see this. There's a few chapters from Why Christianity Must Change or Die, a few chapters from A New Christianity and from Unbelievable. But look, then there's 6 complete books that
I'm not
Bishop
seeing
Spong.
anything, Jim.
Oh, you
Yeah,
can't
it's
see
all
it at
blank.
all?
It's all blank.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway,
That's all right.
It's still loading.
oh, okay. Let me stop it. Try to do it one more time, see what happens. Oh, now I don't even have my line down here. Okay. Anyway, there's 6 whole books. Some of them are the ones that are behind me back here that talk about the different ones, the different ways that Bishop Spong saw Christ and ask us to move beyond that. None of us are going to have time to read all of those books in the time between now and when we're going to talk about them. Choose which ones you want to and bring in that knowledge to the rest of us. Okay?
I'll start with the last and work backwards.
Yeah. I have a lot of those books here. I mean, the ones behind me right here, those, I have those right here. The top 3 I need to reserve and keep because I think those will be some of our primary text.
Yeah.
But the ones down below, if you want to borrow any of those, you're more than welcome. I will make a little list of all of the books that I have so that you can come and borrow any of them at any time. Okay? And use those to be able to help our discussion go forward.
Wasn't there a song called Unbelievable?
There's a song called Unbelievable. Yes, there is.
Who's the guy that sang that? Unbelievable. That's what you are.
Well, that's unforgettable.
Unforgettable. Thank you. I was close.
Which we forgot.
We're very close.
Unforgettable. That's right.
All right. I'm trying to see if there's a way that I can share. There's one more thing I want to share with you. One more document, but I might just have to tell you about it. So let me just say it this way. At the end of class, I'm going to send you all of the chapters that were on the first section. You can read as much of them as you want, but you'll have them all. If you have,
you're going to email them electronically.
I will email them. They will be PDF files, at least on my thing. They show up this way. And so if you're a first grade teacher, you can probably read them.
Okay.
But you can print them out. And
Yeah.
then you'll have them to be able to read.
That sounds good.
And
I've got plenty of ink.
and I will continue to send out stuff that way to help you to be able to enter into that. Okay.
Sure.
Part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to move. How many have realized that the church is often, not our church, I mean the church as a whole, often is a church of boundaries, limits, a church of no. Have you noticed that?
Uh-huh.
And I think what Bishop Spong is drawing us towards is to be a church of welcoming, of inviting, of yes, and drawing us towards. Now that's not always easy to do because those no's are defined, we're designed by people because it's easier to tell people how they don't belong. It's easier to set limits and make everyone a certain way. But the church that Bishop Spong is talking about is trying to draw people towards the largest answers, and it entails trust. Judy, how well did you feel trusted in your evangelical church?
Not at all.
Yeah, I would say that you might have felt trusted if you,
I was the only person in the whole church that didn't listen to Fox News.
yeah. I would say that if you probably felt more trusted when you did something that was in line with what they thought was right. That's how I felt in Mormonism. But if you questioned, suddenly it was harder to feel a part of. If you brought up things that they didn't have as a norm, it was harder to feel trusted. Anybody else feel that way?
Yeah. I wouldn't have walked out, but I probably would have never gone back.
Yeah, yeah. What Bishop Spong is going to ask us to do. Oh, go ahead, Judy.
I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
The seductive thing about that church, Sam, is that they're very good at creating family.
Yeah.
They had a lot of small groups that met in private homes. They really embraced you. I mean, I have people who would pick me up and take me there. They would go way out of their way to pick me up and take me there because I don't drive, you know, and would include me in things that I've not had any other churches do as much.
Okay.
Including St. Francis.
Mhm. What we want to figure out how to do is how to essentially have that same kind of spirit, but around theological questions, around how do we envision God? Do we envision God to say, God loves you when or if? Or do we invite people to come in already loved and we help them to feel that love? How do we do that around the different theological issues we're going to come up against? Do we use them as a way to say, I have the right answer? Or to be able to hear larger and different types of questions? Bishop Spong holds to the question side of things. Now, the problem with questions is it's easier to ask questions that you already have answers to. Isn't it?
Especially if you can find it on page 37 of the book.
The questions?
Yeah, the answers.
Oh, yeah, it's easier if you can point exactly where it's at, huh?
It says in this chapter that, therefore, if
Yeah.
you don't believe that, you're wrong.
So one of the things we're going to try to do for each other is to sit in the midst of those questions and help each other as we're kind of together trying to define paths through the questions. Not to get definitive answers, but to get some strength, some companionship as we go towards those answers. And we want to try to open that up as far as possible as we do that, so that it's not just an answer for Joyce and for Sam, but the rest of us can also enter into that discussion around that answer. And hopefully we take into account people that are not sitting around this table.
Yeah, families, for instance.
Our family, the ones that are relatively similar to us and the ones that are not very similar. Anybody got some of those?
Yeah.
How do we ask questions that don't automatically, as some of Christian religion does, don't automatically send some people to hell because it's easier? You know, I think that's why
it causes the ruffle of feathers.
Yeah, we designed hell because we all have people that we want to send there. And I don't think that's a good practice in Christianity. So what do we do so that we're not automatically just pushing people away? How do we continue to, as Bishop Spong said, live, love, and have the courage to be, and invite others into all of that as well? One of the things that Bishop Spong does in this book right at the top of my head is after he talks about these different things, and he talks specifically about creeds, then he goes back to the creed, but he rewrites it in a way that makes more sense to him. And he essentially invites us to do that same thing. So to end today, I want to read to you how it is that Bishop Spong began to rewrite things. Now, this doesn't mean that suddenly I'm telling you exactly the right answers, but I hope you hear some better answers that he's giving in this than some that were given to you in your life.
Or some
So-
alternative answers. anyway.
Some alternative answers. And I hope that it begins to make you think about what else would you add or delete from this, so that you're coming up with different answers and more helpful answers from your point of view. Okay? So this is what he says. I believe that there is a transcending reality present in the very heart of life. I name that reality God. I believe that this reality has a bias towards life and wholeness, and that its presence is experienced at that which calls us beyond all our fearful and fragile human limits. I believe that this reality can be found in all that is, but that it reaches self-consciousness and the capability of being named, communed with, and recognized only in human life. I believe that heaven, the domain in which this reality has traditionally been domiciled, is not a place, but a symbol standing for the limitlessness of being itself. I believe that this realm of heaven is entered whenever the barriers that seem to bind human life into something less than that for which it is capable are set aside. I believe in Jesus, called Messiah or Christ. I believe that in his life, this transcendent reality has been revealed so completely that it causes people to refer to him as God's Son, even God's only Son. The burning God intensity was so real in him that I look at his life and say, in you, I see the meaning of God. So for me, you are both Lord and Christ. I believe that Jesus was a God presence, a powerful experience of the reality of that ground of being undergirding us all at the very depths of life. I believe in that gift of the Spirit who is called the giver of life. Once we located God only externally and called this God the Father Almighty. Next, we located God in Jesus and we called him the Son incarnate. Now we locate God in every person and we call this God the Holy Spirit. I believe that this Spirit inevitably creates a community of faith that will come in time to open this world to God as the very ground of its life and being. We call that community one because the source of life is one. We call it holy because the holy God is seen through it. We call it Catholic because it is universal and must embrace the whole of creation and all the families of faith. We call it apostolic because it was recognized as present in Jesus and it flowed to us through the witness of his apostles and disciples. This is our point of entry. It will not be our conclusion. But we also name Spirit as inclusive because nothing can separate us from the ground of being or from those whose lives share in the being of God. Not even the name of Jesus must be allowed to do that. I believe, therefore, that being in touch with the ground of being creates the universal communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the reality of resurrection, and the doorway into life that is everlasting. The only divine mission in life that the church of the future could possibly have is to open people to a recognition that the ground of their being is holy, and that when they are in touch with that holy ground of being, they can share in God's creation by giving life, love, and being to others. Now, I know that's not a perfect retelling, but I like it a lot because it expands me further. And I think that's what we want to do. Is expand each other with our visions, with our questions, with what it is that in his questions, Dr. Spong draws out of us and allows us to see differently than what we would just by ourselves. I look forward to the time together. I don't know where it all will take us, but I think that it excites me to know that we'll be on this journey together.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what I'm going to send in the email to you. You will get 9 chapters. Okay. In fact, I'm just going to send it right now. It should be in your email box anytime now. There's going to be 9 chapters that will go out to you from different books, 3 different books. You will also get the little syllabus that I gave out so you can see just a rough sketch of where I think we need to go. And I want you to look at that and say which ones of those propositions might be more interesting to you. So do you want to spend more time on miracles? We'll spend more time on miracles. Do you need to spend less time on prayer? We'll spend less time on prayer. Whatever it is that this group chooses, that's how we'll do it.
This group of 5?
This group of 5, that's exactly right. We'll go at the pace that this group needs and wants to go at, okay? I gave you,
That's fine.
I also sent you kind of my notes from today that I worked from. You can see those, and that includes that creed, if you will, that I just read from Bishop Spong's last chapter of Why Christianity Must Change or Die. The third thing that I sent is essentially an expanded idea of where we're going, and it is this piece that showed. Oops, let me see if I can figure it out. This piece that showed the different chapters to read. So for the next 2 weeks, you're going to want to look at Proposition 1, which is on God. Read as many or as few of these chapters as you can, and come prepared next week to talk about the questions he asks, and maybe even more questions that you have that go beyond what he says. Okay, and we'll have a good time helping each other as we try to understand who is the divine presence in our life.
Okay.
Any questions about all that?
Yeah. Which books of these, you 2 librarians up there, which book of these were banned in libraries? Or were they?
In church libraries?
Oh, not, well, it could have been church libraries.
In
Are any of
church
these
libraries,
books-
this top one absolutely was banned.
All of them were banned from evangelicals, honey.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to, first of all, say thank you for your time, Jim, but also the idea that questioning and doubt and letting go of certainty is a process. It's a part of the spiritual journey. And then the idea that some questions have no answers, and the best that any language can do is point to an answer or point to your experience and answer, but there are some questions that can best be talked about but never
Yeah.
Because the words we use point to something, but they can never describe the ineffable.
I love though, Ron, how we seem to think that if I just say the right word, all powerful, then that describes that ineffable perfectly. Right?
Yes, but well, and you can't, and it's,
And by definition, it can't.
yes.
And yet
We
we,
gotta find the right colored crayon in the box.
yeah. But we keep thinking it does, don't we? So part of what I think the next thing about the next phase of not just Christianity, but religion as a whole, is trying to figure out how not to have to be limited by those kinds of words.
Well, we've got plenty to read.
You have plenty to read, and we'll have plenty to discuss. That's why I left 2 weeks for it, and a break in between, so that you have a week that you don't have to listen to me. All right, any last questions before we go? Thank you. Have a really good week. Enjoy this reading. If you're there on Sunday, I'll see you then. If not, I will see you in class next week.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
and
you, my
don't
friends.
give up. Don't give up. Hang in there, Jim.
I will hang in there. Thank you, my friends. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Yep, my pleasure.
That's it.